Yeah, thank you for joining again. This is our now third Agile virtual community event. And today we're going to focus on working agreements. And so we have our facilitators as before, myself, Quincy Jordan, Principal Transformation Consultant with AgileThought, Andrea Floyd, Transformation Consultant, and Dan Newman, Senior Agile Coach with AgileThought as well. So we thank you for your time. We don't take it lightly, even though we're all working from home, you still could spend your time doing something else. So we appreciate that you are finding value in our virtual events. So just really quickly for those who may be new to the event or not know much about AgileThought. So we are distributed over 6 countries. We were founded in 2000 and we have roughly over 3,000 consultants. We're primarily in the Americas, as you can see. And so we are very accustomed to working remotely in various ways. So as we move along, we are made up of 3 primary areas within the practice: transform, where our strategic consulting area is, build for our digital delivery, and run for our digital operations. All right, so moving along. So the way these community events work, it's a forum followed by typically what will be 2 practice talks. So this practice talk, we're going to focus, again, on working agreements. And we were doing them once per week for roughly around 3 weeks. This is that 3rd week. So when we get to the end, we actually want to get input from you, and I'll tell you how to do that as to whether or not we should pivot or persevere with our frequency. So we are going to continue, but we just want to hear from you on how often you might be interested in these happening. All right, so as we move along. So today's practice talk, using working agreements to help stay focused in a remote work world. And even for myself, it will help if I move everyone's video. All right, so our conversation flow will be that we'll talk about what working agreements are and how they may help really kind of in general, but specifically as we're working through this COVID-19 crisis. We'll talk about how to create working agreements, not just with your team at work, but with your family also, because we're dealing with a time that's just very different than what we normally deal with, even for those of us that work from home. And we'll actually create a working agreement together as a mock kind of simulation, just to give you an idea as to what it should look like, how you should go through the process, and then you can hopefully go off on your own and create your own with your family or your team. So as Dan mentioned earlier, the session is being recorded. And so it may be shared with others. We may make it public. Originally, we were only doing it for our own improvement, but we actually had requests from folks that had joined and folks that couldn't join if we could record so that they could view the sessions later. All right, so as we move along. So our team working agreement for today will be that we'll ask that you have your cameras on. As Dan mentioned earlier, there was someone last week that didn't want to have their camera on because they were caring for a small child. And so we completely understand that. We get it, it's no pressure there. But if you are able to turn your camera on, that is what we would like for you to agree to. Be respectful in tone and words. We like for these events to be interactive. And so we want to give people the opportunity to share and have dialogue. But we just ask that everyone be respectful, which I'm sure that won't be an issue for anyone here. Give space to speak up. So we are remote. We can't always tell when the next person is going to talk. So sometimes we may talk over each other just a little bit. So we want to try to avoid that, to give a little space. But if it happens, it happens. Just be patient with it. Also, we may experience bandwidth issues. So none of us are exactly exempt from that. So be patient with that if that occurs for anyone. If you hear dogs in the background or kids or anything like that, just be patient with those things. We'll ask that you mute yourself if that occurs, or we may have to mute you. But we're asking that everyone else, if you're not that person, to be patient with those types of things. So we'll share and we'll learn together. Again, we want the dialogue to happen. We want you to be engaging with the activities. And we will use Zoom hand up feature at different times. Other times we will literally say, hey, show a thumbs up physically on the screen, on the video, or thumbs down, depending on what you're looking for. So similar to what you see on the screen there. So there are some things we want to cover really quickly about Zoom, just to make sure that everyone's on that same page. And so Dan's going to cover that from here.
All right, we're going to make you dangerous with Zoom. I think people are becoming more adept at it based on what I'm reading. But on the lower left, there should be a microphone icon where you can mute yourself and unmute yourself for verbal contributions. There's your start and stop video. And over on the right-hand side, there's a little chat icon that opens up the chat window. So we'll introduce you to that. And that'll open up a sidebar when you click on it. And in that sidebar, you can choose if you want to message everybody else who is in this session, or if you click that drop down, you could send a private message to somebody. So, you know, some messages, we do invite you. I know Michael did the chat to everyone, and that's perfectly okay. We'll see more of that as we go through. And then there's a raise your hand feature. To Quincy's point, with this number of people, it can be hard to get a word in edgewise sometimes. And so just put your hand up. I'll be looking for hands in the attendee list and do my best to kind of break in 4 people to make space for them if needed. So just go ahead and signal you have something that way.
Okay, this is where I come in. I'm Andrea, and I'm glad to be working with everybody today on this working agreement event. As Quincy said, the frame of this is going to be around creating working agreements for members of your team or your family, and we'll have a chance to do some voting here in a moment to determine what type of mock session we want to conduct today together. But why or what is a working agreement? And it's basically outlines agreements or guidelines that a team or a family agree to work or abide by to help make them more successful or help them in terms of work, maybe get the focus they need, whether it's working from home or in the office, and with a family now that we're commingled in our homes, how to allow us that opportunity for everyone to be successful and communicate in a way that makes sense. It is intended to help develop a shared understanding of how we agreed we were going to work together. And at times, it's something that can be referenced just to increase awareness of if there's been a challenge you've been facing, you can refer back to your working agreement in terms of trying to help coach each other on abiding by it, the agreement, so that you continue to be successful. It's also something that helps each of us remain aware of our own behaviors. And ultimately, the goal is to create quality. So when you're thinking of those items you want to include in your working agreement, you want to make sure you're honoring, the values of your team or your family, and that whatever is included there will help move you towards success. This is something that we typically look for agreement across the board on. We want the majority, or we'll talk about how you drive to consensus, but it's not meant to be a laundry list of everything that anybody had to say. You want to frame it so it's meaningful and usable. And ultimately, you want to make sure that it's visible so that you can refer to it. So I just have a general question for the folks on the call today, and if you could use the chat area to respond to this. Just wondering, what have you used working agreements for? And if you have, how have they been helpful or impactful? So what have you used them for in the past? Go ahead and give you guys a couple minutes or a couple seconds to respond.
Okay, they're starting to come in. So worked with my team and it worked out well between Dev and QA from Nikita. Thanks. Tammy says from our Scrum team within their community of practice. Susan, haven't used them, but see a need for them now with challenges and schedules. Megan says to use them for all team members. We're on the same page. Mike's at a variety of places, trainings, etc. Got a yes. Requirement solicitation, tools and workflows. I haven't done them formally, says Brian, but see a need for ones going forward. They continue to roll in.
Great.
Hey, I would be a little interested in hearing about the Dev and QA, if we can spare a moment. I think that was Nikita.
Yeah, hi. So between Dev and QA, we had an agreement. Earlier, it was not working because QA were like getting stories at the end of the sprint, and they were not getting enough time to perform the testing. So the agreement was that Dev has to, by mid of the sprint, Dev has to share at least some of the stories with QA so that they can start working on it. That was kind of the agreement.
Nice. Yeah, that's a very common pairing that it's good to have that agreement between Dev and QA for that exact reason. Yes, I was just curious to hear your story there.
And just if I could, I see one around using them at the kickoff meeting for the team. So Mariano, do you have something you could share around how you use it that way?
Yeah, happy to share. Basically, whenever we kick new teams off, we build the team charters, and the first thing that we try to agree on are on ways of working, and we establish certain parameters of what's okay to do, what's not okay to do, and sets up the tone to reference back later. And as of late, with the new COVID-19 changing over all of our work environment to be in this new digital world, 100%, it became a little bit more obvious that new work agreements need to be established in terms of like how we're going to be engaging in large teams or small teams, but be able to raise our hands and stay with the cameras on. A few things that you guys have mentioned here at the beginning, we also established those as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so let's move on. So what I wanted to do, for those of you who may not have established working agreements in the past, I wanted to give you a couple of examples. So what's showing here is basically a sample and agreement that you might do with your office team. And you want to make sure, as we work on this process together, one of the things that I'll be mentioning is identifying sort of themes that will evolve, and then sort of making this a digestible document that people not only on the team or in the family, but those that are out, when you pick up this, working agreement, you have a general understanding of what its intention is and how it's working. So this is to stimulate. Have any of you, what on here have you guys seen or do you think would be impactful from a working agreement? Feel free to just share verbally if there's something that you have found helpful. And if you prefer to put something in the chat, you can do it that way too. Okay, so I'm going to keep going for the interest of time, but here's an example. Now that we're all working co-located with families and others, and even outside of a virtual world, you may have an opportunity where a family working agreement. I know Quincy has used this with his family, but what's up on the screen now is just, again, another example of some of the items you might think about to sort of give you some brain teasers as we move into crafting our own as a group. But Quincy, do you mind sharing how you're using the working agreement with your family?
Sure. So there are some things that I've used, such as we have, I don't know if I'll say agreed, but it's been part of the agreement that If my headset is on, then that means I am typically going to be in a meeting or something like that. So that's not a time to disrupt me. And we have also been trying to institute having lunch together. So we haven't done it every day, but we've made it a point to say, okay, well, that's part of our working agreement because we can't normally have lunch together like that as a family. So those are, just a couple of things that we've done. I can share more if you want, but those are two.
I think that's a great example, and I think that helps in terms of giving a frame of understanding. So we'll go on. So as Quincy mentioned, the purpose of this practice talk is not only to create a working agreement so that we all can see what that feels like, but also to share with this community what would the process look like. So if you find this helpful or would find this helpful in practice, we want to give you some simple steps of how to do this with your own family or your teams. So that is the intention here. So we're going to go through enough of a mock experience together, but the ultimate outcome here is to have you comfortable with that process so you can leverage it and use it in your own environments and spaces. So with that being said, one of the things we want to do is do a single working agreement. So by the show of thumbs up or thumbs down, I'd like to understand, do we want to do for our mock session a working agreement for family or for team? So if you would like to do, and if you aren't comfortable turning on your camera, just put it in the chat. But if you make sure you can see your thumb clearly, we're going to take a look at it. But so give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you want to do a team working agreement for our session. Thumbs up for team, thumbs down for family.
I see, oh boy, I think, oh boy, let's see, we go. Hey Quincy, you want to help me with this? I got 1, 2 down, keep them up there. 3, 4 down, 1, 2, 3 up, 4 up, 5, 6. I think
we're almost across the middle there.
It's about 60-40, but I think thumbs up wins.
Okay, We're going to do ours today for team. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Just a reminder that every vote counts.
And I can see in the chat we have a couple for team as well. So perfect. So what we're going to do through the process is first we're going to start off with brainstorming some ideas. It's we were going to ask you to put 1 sticky per idea, and we're going to put those up on a virtual board, which as you look in the comments, the link for we're using Mural has been made available, so you can feel free to start clicking on that to make sure you can get in. And I'm going to tell you that I will stop sharing this screen, and we'll all be just looking at the Mural board here momentarily as I continue working us through that mock session. So again, you'll hear this frequently. You want to make sure you create a safe environment. There's no bad ideas. You want people to speak up. You want to allow them space to be comfortable. What I love about Mural, it's going to be anonymous. So feel free to be, honest and candid. And then, as I said, as we come up with those ideas, we're going to go through some techniques to categorize or group, or what we call affinity map, those things that are similar so that we can narrow those items that we want to consider for the working agreement. The next step is to, and I'm going to talk about reaching consensus on the next slide, but we're going to come to consensus as much as possible on the items we want to consider for our working agreement. And that's going to be where you're going to have some conversations. Once you come up with the items that you want to consider for your agreement, we're going to open it up for conversation so we can really understand more deeply what was meant on that sticky note. So the format's very simple. You want to make sure it's not overly complex. You can do this in your home if you're doing it with a bunch of Post-it notes and a blank wall, or a sliding glass door. So if you're physically located, feel free to use that technique. And again, there's other technology out there that you can leverage to do this. At the end of it, you want to create, and that's why I showed you the example, is you want to formulate your working agreement into something that's visibly understandable to your team or your family, so that you can post it up on Confluence or SharePoint, or put it in a team room or on the refrigerator door of your family home. And ultimately, this is something that's considered a living document. As you grow and learn as a team, you want to make sure you do some retrospective or review and update it as necessary. So before we go into the actual session and Mural, we're going to use some agreement, consensus building techniques. So let me just start out. Sometimes parents just have veto power. So if you're doing this with your family, they may just get to say, no, we're going to add this to the working agreement. So they trump, okay? So that's fine. The other thing is you may be experiencing some specific challenges or needs for your office working team. So you may come up with some ideas or agreements that need to be included to ensure your team's success. So those may be considered critical. So those are going to go into the agreement. The rest of them you can do either thumbs up or thumbs down, a dot voting, or a majority rule, a technique for building consensus. Today with Mural, we'll be doing dot voting, so you'll see how that works. So I'm going to give you, please go into the Mural link now. And if you have a challenge or issue, please note it in chat in Zoom. And I'm going to go into that myself and stop sharing my screen. So you're not going to see, we'll just be looking at videos now. Okay. Great. So I'm going over to Mural. And I'm excellent. I'm seeing folks come in. You've got some anonymous icons at the bottom. If you can see my cursor, you can see me. Now, there's some tricks in Mural that I wanted to share with you. There's some, I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these examples, but to create a note, you simply double click. You can come over and change the color by looking at the color box. So feel free to do that. On the icons on the bottom, if you don't want to see people's cursors, you can just hover over it, and you know which icon you are. If you came in anonymously, there should be a dot below your icon. And if you want to hover over that and turn off broadcast my cursor, that would mean that people wouldn't know where you're in the board. Hopefully everybody, you may lose your way on here. This is sometimes you can move it accidentally. If you notice up in the top right hand corner, there's a button that if you hover over, it looks like a table of contents. It says outline. If you were to click on that, you would be shown an outline that says ideas, agreements, and themes. And at any point, if you get lost on the board, you can click on like if you want to go back to ideas, you can go back there by clicking on ideas. And then you need to, once you do that, you may have to adjust your Zoom just to see the full board again. So.
Hey, Andrea, real quick, I got at least one person who seems like their corporate firewall is blocking this. So if others have that case, they can just message me in the chat or message the group, and I'll scribe them onto the board for people.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we go into dot voting, so I'll walk you through that process, but for now, just please go ahead and I'm going to give you all, again, our frame is this is a team that's working virtually. These are items that you would like to see in your working agreement. So let's take a couple of minutes now for everybody to just add items to the board.
Hey, and Andrea, just in the meantime, I know we weren't going to share a screen for this, but it may be better for the recording. If you could actually share your Mural screen.
Okay, I will share my screen. Can you guys see it now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Good.
Yeah, we have some good ones going in. I'm interested to hear on some of these.
Stop it. Why are you doing that to me? Stop it.
I don't see anything on the board to transcribe, but if, I'm sorry, in the chat to transcribe, but if somebody has something they want to type in and they're unable to for some reason, just go ahead and throw that in there.
Okay, I'm going to give you another second or two, and just for the sake of time, again, we may, I'm sure you have tons of great ideas, but we may have to just manage this. I'm moving some around just so we can see them. So doesn't mean that there are agreements, it's just so that I can start to see the cards so I can do affinity mapping. Okay, if the card's blank, if you meant to put something, go ahead and update that. If not, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to take a look and we're going to go through the affinity mapping portion of this. Okay, so I will ask everybody to help me through this process. So we're going to try to look for clusters of items that are related, okay? So need one moderator per meeting to ensure we don't talk over. That's great. Take breaks, and I'm asking my facilitators to help do that. Does anybody want anything on this purple, or can I delete it? Speak now or forever hold your peace. There it goes. Okay. Okay, move your stickies before stand-up begins. Must have camera on. Reduce unnecessary meetings if you can't. If it can be emailed, then it's email. No meetings over lunchtime. It's okay to take time off. Just follow the proper process to let team know. Empty one. Update your PBIs. The product owner is not our team administrator. And expectations about responding to after hours alert from text, Teams or text. Okay. So it looks like we've got some affinity mapping over here in this section around Team First, United Front, suspend judgment, stay curious, assume good intent, and time box meetings, schedule meetings to start 5 minutes, end 5 minutes. Those are related. Make it clear that distractions are the new norm. No apologies necessary. I like that. So put that there. And another clustering here is no meetings over lunchtime, reduce unnecessary meetings. So just some framework around doing how you're going to use your meetings. So this is the first step of the process. Great job, everybody. The next portion of the process is after you do your affinity mapping and look for similar topics is to now build consensus. So that is either where you're going to do thumbs up and you want to talk about each of the items or the cluster of items here. So what I'm going to ask is I'm going to do dot voting, and you're going to see where you're going to be able to, based on the number of items here, I'm going to give each person 5 votes. And so what you're going to see is, you can see my screen, you're going to be able to click on any card. And what I would ask, if you click on just click on any card and that'll put a dot. You can put a dot, you'll have 5 of them that you get to place, so you can put them on 5 different items, or you can put 3 on one item. However you group them, feel free. So you just simply do that now once I hit begin voting by clicking the card. If you've made a mistake and you want to take your vote back, you simply hit Shift plus click to remove the vote, and your voting is anonymous. So then that'll help me understand what items do we want to move over to agreement so we can have a deeper conversation. So go ahead and begin voting now. Let me give this a couple of seconds to do that. As you can see, if you're watching my screen, I don't see the voting happening. That's why it's completely anonymous. On your own screen, you would be seeing in Mural where your votes are going. So, give you another couple of seconds. I can't tell because I can't see him yet, so I'm trying to give you enough time. Okay, please vocalize if you need more time, otherwise I'm going to stop the voting. Okay, so I'm going to end voting now. And so what Mural does, which is really nice, is it clusters. So right off the bat, we can see where our top votes are. It's the assume good intent and camera must be on. The next section is here for no meetings over lunchtime, stay curious, united front. So that one cluster, we've got some good number of votes. And so this is how it would look for you if you were facilitating the event. Now how it looks on the board, and you guys should already be seeing it on your boards, is you've got the numbers. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt, I've been having some trouble moving some items, so I ask you to bear with me as I try to move some stuff out. The votes will stay visible. I'm going to focus on moving those items in here that have the highest votes. So, okay.
I don't know if we want to treat that group of Team First has about 15 votes in total. Do we want to kind of keep that together as a group?
Yes, this whole thing.
Okay.
So that's why I'm leaving this sort of all
Gotcha.
together. Cool. I need this one over here. Let's see, reduce unnecessary meetings. I'm going to pull that over and take breaks and stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and so this is the part of the exercise that you want to make sure now that what we have is I'm going to hopefully have people give us a little bit more understanding behind what was intended. If we can do that by just sharing why you might have put this item on the board. Give us just some color, that would be helpful. So for the first one, and the reason we're doing that portion of the exercise is so that now we can determine if in fact it's something that we want to keep in the agreements portion of our working agreements. So I'm going to start off by asking the person who said the camera must be on for team calls to just please share why that was important and how you think that would be helpful for your teams working remote.
Yeah, so this is Mariano. For us, it was very important to humanize the process and bring the team as close to as possible and not feel distant. It wasn't about clarity, transparency in any case. It's more so of bringing the human factor in. And these teams are usually the teams that I've been working with to work very close together in person. And also with the teams that we have worked remotely in the past, using cameras have worked very well. That's the reason why we brought that up, and it had worked notoriously well for us.
Has anybody else on the call had a similar experience? I know a lot of us are a little hesitant to come on camera, but now that you're working from home and everybody else is, are there any other folks that are finding it's helpful to be able to see people that you're talking to? Okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. So I always find it very helpful when the video cameras are on, because one of the main reasons is just the nonverbal communication that we're able to get, that we're able to see if someone doesn't quite understand something that we said, or something needs more clarity, in their facial expressions and so forth kind of gives us those cues that, oh, okay, all right, I need to explain something further. We get the head nods, and we can see that, hey, the person is giving us some visual nonverbal communication that they agree with what we're saying, or they're following what we're saying. So I find it helpful, and typically I've always found it pretty helpful.
Right. And I think we all end up getting a little, I know for myself, I stopped worrying about having makeup on and stuff. It's just because I appreciate it's so important to have that human contact. I'm not so concerned anymore with how I may look, just to make that connection. So thanks for sharing, guys. The next one is no meetings over the lunchtime or before 8 a.m. or 5 p.m. Would you mind sharing more about that? Whoever wrote that sticky?
Yeah, that's me again. Sorry. We found it very important to set up the boundaries from the get-go before there was not only an invasion of privacy, but also an overdoing on some people that actually might feel overwhelmed. And this put offense on both ends for people that actually feel that they need to do more than expected, and also protect the people that might be interrupted on their personal life, particularly because being home 24 hours, it blends home and work life a lot. So we made it very clear, and I don't know how it's in your world, guys, but where I work, it's very interesting. Some people show up at 7 a.m., some people leave at 10 p.m., and they all have different schedules. So we just agreed to, this is what's okay for now. This is okay for our time being. And again, it has worked really, really well, establishing what's okay and what's not okay in terms of getting in touch in certain times, particularly because we all have different environments in terms of taking care of elderly people, taking care of your kids, feeding your family, or any of those things that could disrupt work. So establishing not only those things, but other breaks as well on what's okay and what's not okay, it has worked really well for us as well.
Wonderful. That's a great idea. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going so that I can have other folks share as well. Need one moderator per meeting to ensure we don't talk over each other. Interesting. Who would like to share more about their sticky?
Okay, that's me again. So that's pretty straightforward. So what we decided was that during this type of environments, it's very easy for people to jump in and have a conversation, and everybody might have an opinion. So we decided that our Scrum Masters were going to be the one that, after driving certain conversation, depending on who's involved in those work streams, to call one person at a time to see if there were updates or anything that they had to say, instead of letting them jump in straight into the conversation, for the sake of avoiding overlap and being very thoughtful about establishing a process of updates per se, which is different than being in person.
Perfect. Anybody have some similar techniques that they're using to help give people the space to share in a virtual world? And if you're more comfortable chatting, you can do that through Zoom, and Dan will share with us. Okay, I'm going to go on. I'm going to jump down here to assume good intent. It's sort of related to a few of these, but I think this will be interesting to hear more. So the sticky author for assume good intent, do you mind giving us some background on that one?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer, and I'm having computer issues, so hopefully you can hear me. I can't share my video.
We can.
I wrote that sticky. I am a Scrum Master for a team that is mostly international, so most of the team members are based in Europe. And with us trying to get to know each other and the cultural differences, it's just a good level set so that we all appreciate and understand that we're all coming from a good place. And it helps with the, with our team working together and in keeping us productive and focused.
It's lovely. Yeah, I've heard the word grace used a lot during this time, giving each other some grace. So thank you so much for sharing, Jennifer.
Sure.
How about a couple more in this area, because these are interesting. Stay curious. What does that mean?
Hi, Andrea. This is Renee. That
Hi,
is my
Renee.
sticky. In a similar vein to assume positive intent, is we judge people less when we're more curious about them. So it helps to cut down on some of that negative reactionary emotion that can creep up when frustration maybe becomes apparent.
Nice. Thank you, Renee. And how about United Front?
Hey, Andrea, maybe before we go on to that one, I noticed Michael had put a comment in about it being tough when emotions come into play, and that was with the previous one, but it seemed to kind of also apply to the last one that Renee just shared. So, Michael, could you elaborate on that a little bit, or maybe just share a bit about that if you don't mind?
Oh, sure. I mean, it just really kind of, especially if you're in the coach or Scrum Master sort of position on that if you have someone who is being, shall we say, obstinate, resistant, whatever, to, it can be hard sometimes to remember, that everybody's coming from, a good place, and to assume that everybody's coming from a good place and not just instantly be like, this person's just being mean because they want to be, and so that's when you talk about getting those emotions pulled into play and whatnot, that can be really difficult sometimes. So it's good to kind of have that reminder to yourself, if nothing else, to remember that everyone has good intent.
Really like that, because I'm sure there's complexities of working virtually, and it can create more tension than normal. But I think a lot of these items that we're reviewing are meaningful whether we're virtual or not. So thank you for your feedback, Michael. And in that domain, I'm going to go to one last one, United Front. Who authored that sticky could share with us what that means to them. Okay, I'm going to assume you're either on mute or I'll move on. Okay, I'll move on. One more in a new area, takes breaks, steps away from the laptop. Would somebody like to share what that means with their teams? So I'm just going to do a sound check. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Then I think that's pretty, says it right there. I think all of us need that opportunity. I think Marianne, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, you mentioned the importance of days running on and on. So making sure we give each other permission to take that time to refuel and re-energize by stepping away it's going to be critical. I know a technique Quincy's used is he will step outside and close his eyes and look towards the sun, and that really reinvigorates him. So great tips. Anybody have anything they want to share around something that's working for them or their teams in terms of finding those moments to re-energize?
Sure, Andrea. This is Carl Taylor. We actually try to enforce everyone taking breaks. We have a lot of team members. Actually, I had one team member tell me she had 7 meetings in one day. And it was like, and when do you take a break? When do you have time to summarize those meetings? When do you have time to do any action items on those meetings? So we actually went as far as challenging people to try to get at least 1,500 or 2,000 steps in during lunch, just to get away from the laptops.
Great tips. Thank you so much, Carl. Okay, and then we have a very specific one, update your PBIs. The product owner is not our team administrator. We had a couple of votes on that one, so.
Hey, Andrea, it's Renee again.
Hi, Renee.
I think we maybe missed an Affinity opportunity from one on the other side to move your stickies before the stand-up begins. And this is basically just what it sounds like. Come prepared to meetings. This is just a very specific example from my world.
Okay. So it's meeting related. Got it. Thank you. Then we have time box our meetings. Anybody want to, who wrote that, have any other color they'd like to share with this audience?
I didn't write it, but I know at least a scenario where meetings come back to back to back and one overlaps, other ones have to start late. It's I don't know, quite an imposition and bordering on quite rude to not kind of respect the time box and the request for people's time.
Right, and that's so true. That is so true. Was somebody had reduced unnecessary meetings. So we're seeing a theme, which is the final portion that we're going to be doing here in a second. So we'll leave that. And then one last one to wrap up, just walking through. So the technique, again, is to brainstorm, to then dot vote. So you can do some, affinity mapping, so you can get organized around those things that are similar, and then do dot voting or another techniques to come to a consensus on what you might to consider for your agreements, and then to allow people the opportunity to give some color and background on what they meant by the sticky that they've provided, so you can make that call. Does it stay in, or is it something that you would like to remove from the current working agreement that you're working towards? So our final one, and this is make it clear that distractions are the new norm. No apologies necessary. That's a great one. Who would like to share more about this sticky that they wrote?
Hey, Andrea, this is Brian. I wrote that, and this is really big for us when we had our offshore team, especially in India. They were traveling to then have our sprint review, sprint planning meetings at the end of their day and the beginning of our day. And it was always like people trying to call in immediately, or wives or kids or dogs or whatever in the background. And there's certainly a lot to play there with the cultural aspect of things, but that they were always apologizing, like, oh, I'm so sorry, 2 seconds later, I'm so sorry that there's a noise in the background. And then, of course, after all this stuff happened, I found a lot of my team members doing the same exact thing. And it's like you can spend half of your meeting apologizing for all of the distractions that are going on. So it's always, I tried to make it clear that, look, things are going to happen. We're going to hear background noise. You're going to see movement in your cameras if you have them on. It's not a big deal. There's no need to apologize. We're all trying to, do the things that we can do to work together as a team. So let's just all understand that that's going to be, again, the new norm going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Brian. Okay, so to honor our time box, I'm just going to come over here and looks like I did that one. I'm just going to ask you, as you look at this board, I was trying to move things around in terms of the themes I was seeing evolve. And so I'm just going to put down my thought. Some ideas, and ask if you had any other, give each other grace, I'm going to call that one. And then we had look for times to re-energize. So, oops, re-energize. Move that back up here. Okay, so these are the themes that I saw. Did anybody else see any other themes, or would you capture them differently from what's here on the agreements? Okay, so the last and final step is you would want to, as the person who facilitated the event, to now create a visual representation of your working agreement. And you might choose to, run through the language so it's meaningful and impactful as people continue to reference it as they work together. So you want to honor what's here on the agreements, but you have some license for wordsmithing and organizing. And then I would encourage you to bring back the team to review the working agreement and ensure that it honors the intention that they were hoping to achieve. And then last best practice is to make sure you review and refresh as the team continues to work together. So that's the process, guys.
Andrea, can you go ahead and show the PowerPoint again?
I can.
Thanks.
Okay. Trying to get so I can see this and get us to the end here. And there we go. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Quincy for the closing.
Sure. Thanks, Andrea. So again, we are AgileThought. We just want to just make it clear, some of the things that we do. It's our pleasure to contribute to the overall community by having these community events, these virtual community events. So we're definitely happy to do this. I'm happy to provide this as a service. We do just want to make sure that everyone is aware of the services that we provide. Again, Transform, Strategic Consulting, our Build practice, which is digital delivery, and Run for digital operations. So whether it's transformation work, enterprise transformation, agile coaching, development, custom development, or Run work, DevOps, all those types of things, we're happy to provide those services. All right, so as we move on, as your facilitators, we're happy to have you guys here and to be able to have this dialogue and share. It's, again, we are Agilists really kind of by nature, and we really enjoy helping others and bringing value to others. I don't know, maybe almost more than we probably should, but we really like doing it. So as we do our wrap up here, our next practice talk will be on Kanban for work and home. So that will be next Thursday, April 16th, at the same time from 12 to 1. We also want your input on whether we should pivot or persevere in our frequency. So we've been doing these once per week, but we're just wanting to know what you think. Do you think once per week is good? Do you think once every other week is good? Once every 3 weeks, once a month, whatever the case. So we're gonna ask that in the retro, which there's a link there, and the link should also be in the chat. So in the retro, there's a start, stop, and continue. So when you give your general feedback around stop, start, and continue, we're gonna ask that you also apply that to the frequency question of pivot or persevere in terms of how often we have these events.